Chapter 10. Out of Fairyland. You may fancy, if you can, what joy there was in Fairnilee when Randal came home. They quite forgot the hunger and the hard times, and the old nurse laughed and cried over her bairn that had grown into a tall, strong young man. And to Lady Ker it was all one as if her husband had come home again, and he was the first that she knew him long ago. Randal had his face and his eyes, the very sound of his voice. They could hardly believe he was not a spirit, and they clasped his hands and hung on his neck and would not keep their eyes off of him. This was the end of all their sorrow, and it was as if Randal had come back from the dead, so that no people in the world were ever so happy as they were the next day when the sun shone down on the tweed of the green trees that rustle in the wind around Fairnilee. But in the evening, when the old nurse was out of the way, Randal sat between his mother and Jean and held each in his hands as if they could not let him go, for fear he should vanish from them again. And they would turn around anxiously if anything stirred, for fear it would be two white deer sometimes that are said to come to people escaped from Fairyland, and then those people must rise and follow them, and never return any more. But the white deer never came for Randal. So he told them all of his adventures, and that had happened to him since that midsummer night, 7 long years ago. It had been with him as if it was with Jean. He had gone to the wishing well and wished to see the fairy in Fairyland, and he had seen the beautiful castle in the well, and a beautiful woman's face had floated up to meet his on the water. And he had gathered the white roses, and then he heard the great sound of horses' feet, and the bells were jingling, and a lady rode up, the very lady he had seen in the well. She had a white horse and was dressed all in green, and she beckoned Randal to mount on her horse, and with her before him on the pillion. And the bells on the bridle rang, and the horse flew faster than the wind. So they rode and rode through the summer night, and they came to a desert place, and the living lands were very far behind. Then the fairy queen showed him 3 paths, one steep and narrow, and beset by briars and thorns. That was the road to goodness and happiness, but it was little trodden and marked with the feet of people who had come and gone. Then there was a wide, smooth road that went through fields of lilies, and that was a path of easy living and pleasure. The 3rd path wound about the hillside, with ferns and heather that rode all the way to Elfland, and that way they rode. And still they rode through a country of dark night, and they crossed great black rivers. They never saw neither sun nor moon, but they heard the roaring of the sea. From that country they came into the light, and into a beautiful garden that lies around the castle of the fairy queen. There they lived, in a noble company of gallant knights and fair ladies. All seemed very mirthful, and they rode and hunted and danced, and it was never a dark night, nor broad daylight, but like early summer dawn before the sun is risen. There Randal said they had quite forgotten his mother and Jean, and the world where he was born, in Fairnilee. But one day he happened to see a beautiful golden bottle in a strange shape, all set with diamonds, and opened it. There was in it sweet-smelling water, as clear as crystal, and he poured it out his hand and passed it over his eyes. Now this water had the power to destroy the glamour in Fairyland, and make people see what it really was. And when Randal touched his eyes with it, oh, everything was changed in a moment. He saw that nothing was what it had seemed. The gold vanished from the embroidered curtains and grew dim and wretched like a misty winter day. The fairy queen that had seemed so happy and beautiful in a green dress was a weary, pale woman in black, with a melancholy face and melancholy eyes. She looked as if she had been there for thousands of years, always longing for the sunlight and the earth, and the wind and the rain. There were sleepy poppies twisted her hair instead of golden crown, and the knights and the ladies were changed. They looked but half alive, and some, in place of their green robes, were dressed in rusty mail, pierced with spears and stained with blood, and some were in burial robes of white, and some in dresses torn and dripping with water, or marked with the burning of a fire. All were dressed strangely in some ancient fashion. Their weapons were old-fashioned too, unlike any that Randal had ever seen on earth. And their festivals were not of dainty meats, but of cold, tasteless flesh, and of beans and pulse, and such things as old heathens before the coming of the gospel used to offer to the dead. It was dreadful to see them at such feasts, dancing and riding and pretending to be merry with hollow faces and unhappy eyes. Randall wearied of Fairyland, which now he saw it looked clearly like a great unending stretch of land in barren and grassy country, beside a grey sea where there was no tide. All the woods were black cypress trees and poplar, and a wind from the sea drove a sea mist through them, white and cold, and it blew through the open courts of the fairy castle. Randall so longed more and more for the old earth he had left, and the changes of summer and autumn, and the streams of Tweed and the hills and his friends. Then the voice of Jeanie had come down to him, sounding from far away, and he was sent up by the fairy queen in a fairy form as the hideous dwarf to frighten her away from the white roses in the enchanted forest. But her goodness and her courage had saved him, for he was a christened knight, and not a man of the fairy world, and he had taken his own form again beneath her hand, when she signed him with the cross, and here he was, safe and happy, at home in Fairnilee.